What would you do if, in a single day, everything you loved was taken from you? Your wealth, your home, your family, gone in an instant. And then, as you struggled to understand why, your own body was racked with unbearable pain, and even those closest to you turned against you. Would you still trust in God? This is the story of Job, a man tested beyond human limits, a man who faced unimaginable suffering, yet held onto a faith that would defy heaven and earth. Journey with me through this tale of loss, endurance, and ultimate restoration as we uncover one of the most powerful stories of faith ever told. But before we start, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. In the land of Uz, there lived a man named Job, known for his righteousness and deep devotion to God. He was a man of integrity, always seeking to do what was right. Unlike many others who sought wealth and power for their own gain, Job used his blessings to honor God and care for those around him. He avoided evil and lived a life of honesty, kindness, and faith. Job was an extraordinarily wealthy man. His livestock numbered in thousands: 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys. He also had many servants, all of whom helped manage his vast estates. His wealth and influence made him one of the greatest men in the East, but he never let his prosperity turn his heart away from God. His greatest treasures, however, were his 10 children, 7 sons and 3 daughters. They were a close-knit family who often gathered for feasts at one another's homes. These gatherings were filled with laughter, food, and the joy of shared companionship. Job delighted in seeing his children enjoy life, but he was even more concerned with their spiritual well-being. As a devoted father, Job made it his habit to pray for his children regularly. After each feast, he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt sacrifices on their behalf. He thought to himself, "What if they have sinned in their hearts?" He wanted to ensure that they remained righteous before God, even if they had unknowingly done wrong. This was not a mere ritual for Job. It was an expression of his deep love for both God and his family. Job was widely respected not only for his wealth, but also for his wisdom, kindness, and fairness. He treated his servants well, gave generously to the poor, and defended the rights of those in need. Unlike many wealthy men of his time, Job did not see his riches as a source of pride, but as a blessing entrusted to him by God. He remained humble, understanding that all he had was given to him by the Lord. One day, in the heavenly courts, the angels gathered before God to present themselves before him. Among them came Satan, the adversary. God asked Satan where he had been, and Satan replied, "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it." Then the Lord said, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." Satan challenged God, claiming that Job only served him because he was blessed and protected. "Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." The Lord, knowing Job's true heart, allowed Satan to test him. He gave him power over all Job's possessions, but forbade him from harming Job himself. Confident in Job's steadfastness, God permitted the trial to begin. Unaware of this heavenly conversation, Job was about to face a series of devastating losses. One day, as he went about his daily life, a messenger rushed in with grave news and said, master raiders had attacked and stolen his oxen and donkeys, killing the servants who tended them. Before Job could fully grasp the weight of this tragedy, another messenger arrived. Fire had fallen from the sky, consuming his sheep and more of his servants. Still reeling from these shocks, yet another messenger arrived, breathless with horror. Master, a band of raiders had swept through, stealing camels and slaughtering even more of our workers. The blows came swiftly, one after another, stripping away Job's wealth and livelihood in an instant. But the worst news was yet to come. A final messenger appeared, his face pale with sorrow. Job's children, who had been feasting together in their eldest brother's house, had been struck by a mighty wind. The house had collapsed, and all 10 of his beloved children had perished. In deep grief, Job tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell to the ground in worship. He declared, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. Despite his immense suffering, Job did not sin by blaming God, and thus began Job's great trial. Once again, the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan was among them. The Lord asked, "Where have you come from?" Satan answered, "From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it." Then the Lord said, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on earth, blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil, and still he maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without reason." Satan replied, "Skin for skin. A man will give all he has for his own life, but stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face." The Lord permitted Satan to afflict Job, but commanded him to spare his life. With this permission, Satan set out to afflict Job with a painful disease. Without warning, Job found himself covered in agonizing sores from the top of his head to the soles of his feet. His once strong body became weak, racked with pain. His skin cracked, his flesh burned, and the torment was unbearable. He took a piece of broken pottery to scrape at his sores, sitting among the ashes in misery. His wife, overwhelmed by his misery, could no longer bear to see him suffer. She said, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." But Job, though in agony, rebuked her gently, saying, "You are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" Despite his suffering, Job did not sin in what he said. Word of Job's suffering spread, and his 3 friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, came to see him. When they arrived, they could barely recognize him. His body was frail, his face gaunt, and his pain unmistakable. Overcome with sorrow, they wept aloud, tore their robes, and sprinkled dust on their heads in mourning. They sat with Job in silence for 7 days and 7 nights, for they saw his suffering was too great for words. Though Job's body was broken and his heart heavy with grief, he refused to turn away from God. His faith, though tested, endured. After 7 days of silence, Job finally spoke. His pain, grief, and despair overwhelmed him, and he cursed the day of his birth. "May the day of my birth perish, and the night that said, 'A boy is conceived.'" He wished he had never been born. That darkness would cover the day of his birth, so it would be erased from memory. He lamented, asking why he had not died at birth. Why did I not perish at birth and die as I came from the womb? Job longed for death, believing it would bring him peace and rest from his suffering. He described the grave as a place where kings, rulers, and the weary find rest, free from toil and trouble. Job cried out, "Why is life given to those in misery, and life to the bitter of soul, to those who long for death that does not come?" He felt trapped, unable to escape his suffering, and overwhelmed by dread. He continued, expressing the depth of his anguish, mourning that light was given to one who suffered so greatly. For sighing has become my daily food, my groans pour out like water. He declared, "What I feared has come upon me, what I dreaded has happened to me. I have no peace, no quietness, I have no rest, but only turmoil." Job's lament revealed his deep anguish, but even in his sorrow, he did not curse God. Instead, he poured out his heart, seeking understanding for his suffering, questioning why he must endure such pain, yet never turning away from his Maker. After Job finished his lament, his friend Eliphaz the Temanite was the first to respond. He had listened in silence for 7 days, witnessing Job's grief. But he could no longer hold back his thoughts. "If someone ventures to speak, will you be impatient?" he began. "But who can keep from speaking?" Eliphaz reminded Job of his past righteousness. "Think how you have instructed many, how you have strengthened feeble hands. Your words have supported those who stumbled. You have strengthened faltering knees." But now, seeing Job in distress, he questioned his reaction. "But now trouble comes to you, and you are discouraged. It strikes you, and you are dismayed." Then Eliphaz made a dangerous assumption. "Consider now, who, being innocent, has ever perished? Where were the upright ever destroyed?" He argued that suffering must be the result of sin, implying that Job's calamities were due to wrongdoing. "As I have observed, those who plow evil and those who sow trouble reap it." Eliphaz then shared a mysterious vision he had received in the night. "A word was secretly brought to me. My ears caught a whisper of it." In his vision, he saw a spirit that made his bones tremble. The spirit spoke, saying, "Can a mortal be more righteous than God? Can even a strong man be purer than his Maker?" The message was clear. No human is without fault before God. Eliphaz continued, advising Job to seek God and accept his suffering as discipline. "Blessed is the one whom God corrects, so do not despise the discipline of the Almighty." He assured Job that if he repented and sought God earnestly, he would be restored. "From 6 calamities he will rescue you. In 7 no harm will touch you." But Eliphaz's words did not bring comfort. He assumed Job had sinned, failing to understand that Job's suffering was not due to wrongdoing. Job listened, but knew his heart was innocent before God. Yet, despite his strong words, Eliphaz also offered a message of hope. He assured Job that if he sought God earnestly and committed himself to righteousness, the Lord would restore him. "Blessed is the one whom God corrects," he said, "so do not despise the discipline of the Almighty." Eliphaz believed that if Job truly repented, God would heal his wounds, rescue him from his troubles, and grant him peace and prosperity once more. He sighed deeply and responded, If only my anguish could be weighed and all my misery be placed on the scales. It would surely outweigh the sand of the seas. No wonder my words have been impetuous. Job wanted his friends to understand the depth of his suffering. He continued, "The arrows of the Almighty are in me. My spirit drinks in their poison. God's terrors are marshaled against me." Job felt as if God himself had struck him. His pain was unbearable, and he could not understand why he had been afflicted so severely. Job challenged Eliphaz's assumptions. Does a wild donkey bray when it has grass, or an ox bellow when it has fodder? He implied that his cries were not without cause. His suffering was real, and his lament was justified. Job longed for relief and wished that God would grant him his request, that God would be willing to crush me, to let loose his hand and cut off my life. Still, Job held on to his integrity. Then I would still have this consolation, my joy in unrelenting pain, that I had not denied the words of the Holy One. Though he suffered greatly, Job did not curse God. Instead, he expressed his weakness and questioned his ability to endure. Do I have the strength of stone? Is my flesh bronze? Do I have any power to help myself now that success has been driven from me? Then Job rebuked his friends. Anyone who withholds kindness from a friend forsakes the fear of the Almighty. He had expected comfort, but instead he received condemnation. My brothers are as undependable as intermittent streams. Job compared his friends to seasonal rivers that dry up when they are most needed. Job suggested that his friends were afraid to truly face his suffering. He asked them, "Have I ever said, 'Give me something on my behalf'? Yet you are treating me as though I was guilty." As the conversation continued, Job, hurt by his accusations, defended himself. He insisted that he was innocent and that their words only added to his misery. He cried out to God, asking for an answer. Why had this suffering come upon him? What had he done to deserve such pain? But the heavens remained silent. Job sat in his suffering, his body racked with pain, his heart heavy with sorrow. His friends had spoken, offering their counsel, but their words had only deepened his despair. Turning his face upward, Job lifted his voice not to his friends, but to God himself. He had endured enough. He could remain silent no longer. "Is not life on earth full of toil?" Job asked, his voice trembling. "Are not our days filled with hardship, like a hired worker longing for his wages?" He saw himself as a servant, struggling through endless suffering, longing for relief that never came. Night after night, he lay awake, his body aching, his mind tormented, his skin covered in sores, festered with infection. His days dragged on in misery, and he wondered if he would ever know peace again. Desperation filled Job's words as he cried out about the frailty of life. "My days pass swifter than a weaver's shuttle, and they come to an end without hope." He felt as though his life was slipping away, each moment drawing him closer to the grave. His suffering seemed endless, yet life itself felt fleeting. He longed for understanding, for an answer from God. Why had he been born only to suffer? Why had his days been filled with such torment? If God cared for him, why did he not bring him relief? Job's lament turned into an earnest plea. "Remember, O God, that my life is but a breath. My eyes will never see good again." He feared that he would die without answers, without justice. He felt as though he had been abandoned, left to suffer alone. Yet, even as he spoke, he knew that God was listening. He did not understand his ways, but he knew he was there. In his sorrow, Job questioned why God would focus on him, a mere man. What is mankind that you make so much of him, that you test him every moment? He felt overwhelmed by the weight of his suffering, as though he were being constantly watched and judged. "Will you not look away from me for a moment?" he pleaded. Job was not claiming to be without sin, but he did not understand why he was being so harshly afflicted. His despair deepened as he pondered his own mortality. "If I have sinned, what have I done to you, you who see everything we do?" He begged for an answer, for an explanation. If he was guilty, why would God not pardon him? If he was innocent, why did his suffering continue? As Job's voice faded into the night, he felt no closer to understanding his plight. His pain remained, his questions unanswered. Yet, despite his anguish, he had turned his cries toward God. His faith, though battered, still clung to the hope that somewhere, somehow, the Almighty would answer him. As Job sat in his suffering, waiting for comfort, another of his friends, Bildad the Shuhite, finally spoke. Unlike Eliphaz, who had tried to reason with Job through visions and personal experience, Bildad's approach was blunt and unyielding. He could not understand why Job continued to insist on his innocence, and he was determined to correct him. "How long will you speak these things?" Bildad asked. "Your words are like a mighty wind." He believed that Job's complaints were nothing more than empty, misguided speeches. In his mind, Job was refusing to accept the truth, that God is just and never allows the innocent to suffer. Bildad was convinced that Job's suffering was proof of wrongdoing, either in Job's own life or in his family's past. "If your children sinned against him," Bildad continued, "then he gave them over to their wrongdoing." These words pierced Job's already broken heart. His children, whom he had loved dearly and prayed for continually, were gone. Now his friend was suggesting that their deaths were a direct punishment from God for their sins. It was a cruel and painful accusation. But Bildad did not stop there. He urged Job to seek God and plead for mercy. "If you are pure and upright," he said, "surely he will rouse himself on your behalf and restore you to your rightful place." In his view, Job's only hope lay in repentance. If Job was truly innocent, God would soon make things right. If not, then Job had no reason to complain about his suffering. To support his argument, Bildad pointed to the wisdom of the past. "Ask the former generations," he advised. "Learn from those who came before us." He believed that the experiences of previous generations proved that God always upholds justice. The wicked, he claimed, may prosper for a time, but they are eventually cut down like weeds. The godless put their trust in fragile things like a spider's web, and when disaster comes, they have nothing to hold on to. Bildad painted a picture of the fate of the wicked. They are like a plant in the sunshine, spreading out over the garden, its roots entwined around stones. But when it is uprooted, its place remembers it no more. He wanted Job to understand that if he had truly been righteous, he would not have fallen so suddenly and completely. Instead, he would have remained secure like a tree deeply planted in rich soil. Despite his harsh words, Bildad did offer Job a glimmer of hope. "Surely God does not reject the blameless or strengthen the hands of evildoers," he said. If Job would turn back to God, his life would once again be filled with laughter and joy. His enemies would be put to shame, and his suffering would be replaced with prosperity. But Job knew that life was not so simple. He had already searched his heart and found no hidden sin that would explain his suffering. Bildad's words, rather than bringing comfort, only added to his pain. Zophar the Naamathite, the third of Job's friends, could no longer contain his thoughts. He was frustrated by Job's insistence on his innocence and spoke with bluntness and severity. Are all these words to go unanswered? Is this talker to be vindicated? He accused Job of speaking too much and claiming a level of righteousness he did not possess. You say to God, "My beliefs are flawless and I am pure in your sight." Oh, how I wish that God would speak, that he would open his lips against you. Zophar argued that Job's suffering was deserved and even suggested that Job's punishment was less than what he truly merited. Know this, God has even forgotten some of your sin. Unlike Eliphaz and Bildad, who at least showed some level of sympathy, Zophar was harsh and unwavering in his judgment. He then spoke of God's wisdom, declaring that his understanding was beyond human reach. Can you fathom the mysteries of God? Can you probe the limits of the Almighty? He insisted that God knew all things and saw the sins of men, punishing the wicked according to his will. Surely he recognizes deceivers, and when he sees evil, does he not take note? Despite his harsh words, Zophar urged Job to repent, believing that this was the only path to restoration. If you devote your heart to him and stretch out your hands to him, then free of fault, you will lift up your face. You will stand firm and without fear. He promised Job that if he turned to God, his suffering would end and his life would be renewed. You will surely forget your trouble, recalling it only as waters gone by. However, if Job refused to repent, Zophar warned that he would perish. The eyes of the wicked will fail, and escape will elude them. Their hope will become a dying gasp. His words were not meant to comfort, but to convict Job of wrongdoing, assuming without question that Job had sinned. Yet Zophar, like his companions, failed to understand the true reason behind Job's suffering. He believed in a simple equation: suffering comes from sin, and prosperity comes from righteousness. But Job knew this was not the whole truth. Though Zophar spoke of God's greatness, his words lacked wisdom and compassion. He did not see the deeper mystery of Job's trial, that Job was suffering not because of sin, but as a test of faith. Weighed down by grief and confusion, Job lifted his voice again. He no longer sought to argue with his friends, but turned his lament toward God. With his heart filled with sorrow, he pleaded for understanding, longing to know why he had been made to suffer so greatly. "I loathe my very life," Job confessed. "I will give free course to my complaint. I will speak in the bitterness of my soul." His words carried the depth of his anguish. He did not curse God, but he sought answers. If he was innocent, why was he being treated as guilty? If he had done no wrong, why did God seem so distant? Job asked God directly, "Do you find joy in oppressing me, in despising the work of your own hands?" He knew that God was just, but he struggled to understand how justice was being carried out in his own life. Was he being punished despite his innocence? Job acknowledged that God had fashioned him with care, knitting him together in his mother's womb. He marveled at how God had granted him life and kindness, watching over his every step. But now it seemed as though that same hand was striking him down. His heart heavy with sorrow, Job questioned whether his fate had been predetermined. "If I am guilty, woe to me! But if I am innocent, I cannot lift my head, for I am full of shame and drowned in my affliction." He wondered if his suffering was set in place from the beginning, if all his days had led him to this moment of despair. Job saw no escape from his misery. If he held his head high, humiliation would follow. If he sought relief, suffering would chase him down. He felt trapped, unable to find a reason for his pain. His pleas grew more desperate as he longed for God to remember him not as a sinner, but as one who had tried to live righteously. Then, in a moment of deep sorrow, Job wished he had never been born. "Why then did you bring me out of the womb?" he asked. "Would that I had perished before any eye saw me." If life was to be filled with such suffering, what was its purpose? He wished for just a short moment of peace before he descended into the grave, where he believed there would be no more turmoil, no more pain. With a final plea, Job asked God to look away from him just long enough to find a little comfort before his days came to an end. He did not know what lay ahead, but he knew his strength was failing. In his suffering, he yearned for understanding, but no answer had yet come. Though Job was weary and full of sorrow, his words showed that his heart still sought God. He did not turn to idols, nor did he seek refuge in wickedness. Even in his pain, he directed his cries to the Almighty, hoping that somehow he would find the answers he so desperately needed. Job listened patiently as his friends continued to insist that his suffering must be a result of wrongdoing. They argued that God punishes the wicked and rewards the righteous, implying that Job must have sinned to deserve such hardship. Frustrated by their lack of understanding, Job responded with a speech that emphasized God's absolute control over all things. "You think you're the only ones with wisdom," Job said, rebuking his friends. "But I also have understanding. I am not inferior to you." He reminded them that even the simplest of people could see that his suffering was not proof of his guilt. His friends spoke as if they had all the answers, but Job knew that true wisdom belonged to God alone. Job pointed out that it was easy for those who lived in comfort to judge those who suffered. "The tents of robbers prosper, and those who provoke God are secure," he observed. This challenged the idea that only the wicked suffer while the righteous prosper. Life did not always follow such simple patterns. To emphasize his point, Job turned to nature as a witness to God's sovereignty. He urged his friends to ask the animals, the birds, the fish, and the earth itself, and they would testify that everything is under God's control. He declared that in God's hand is the life of every creature and the breath of all mankind. Nothing happened outside of his will. Wisdom and power belong to God, Job proclaimed. He tears down, and none can rebuild. He imprisons a man, and none can set him free. He described how God's power extended over kings and rulers, making the wise foolish and stripping the mighty of their strength. He uncovered deep mysteries, brought darkness into the light, and controlled the fate of nations. No one could resist his will. Job's words carried both awe and sorrow. He acknowledged God's might, but he also wrestled with the reality of his suffering. He did not doubt God's justice, but he struggled to understand why the innocent sometimes suffered while the wicked seemed to flourish. His frustration grew as he addressed his friends once more. "You are all worthless physicians," he said. If only you would be silent, that would be your wisdom." Instead of bringing comfort, their words had only added to his pain. They assumed they spoke for God, but Job challenged them. Would they lie on God's behalf? Would they speak unjustly for him? Job knew he had no way to argue against God's will, but he longed for a fair hearing. He wanted to present his case before the Almighty, to understand why he was suffering. Yet even as he questioned, he maintained his reverence. "Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him," Job declared. His faith remained even as he searched for answers. As Job continued to speak, he revealed a heart both troubled and steadfast. He did not deny God's power, nor did he curse him, but he yearned for understanding. His suffering had not shaken his faith, but it had deepened his desire to know the ways of the Almighty. Job continued to wrestle with the words of his friends. Their accusations weighed heavily on him, but he refused to accept their claim that his suffering was due to secret sin. He turned his focus to God, longing for a direct conversation with the Almighty to plead his case. Job knew that his friends had misjudged him, and he was determined to speak the truth. "My eyes have seen all this, my ears have heard and understood it," Job declared. He had lived a life of wisdom and righteousness, and he was not ignorant of the ways of God. His friends spoke as if they had deeper knowledge, but Job saw their words as empty. "You, however, smear me with lies. You are worthless physicians, all of you. If only you would be altogether silent. For you, that would be wisdom." Job was frustrated with their inability to offer real comfort. He accused them of speaking falsely on God's behalf, twisting the truth to fit their understanding of suffering and justice. Will you speak wickedly on God's behalf? Will you speak deceitfully for him? Job challenged them. If God examined their words, would they stand? Would they not tremble before his judgment? Turning his thoughts directly to God, Job pleaded for an audience with him. "Only grant me these two things, God, and then I will not hide from you. Withdraw your hand far from me, and stop frightening me with your terrors. Then summon me, and I will answer, or let me speak, and you reply to me." Job longed to understand why he was suffering. He asked God to reveal his faults if he had sinned, but if he had not, then why was he being treated as an enemy? Job expressed his sorrow, feeling as though his life was wasting away. He described himself as something fragile, crumbling like a leaf driven by the wind, or like dry chaff that is swept away. He questioned why God seemed to keep record of his faults and hold him accountable for sins committed in his youth. Man decays like a rotten thing, like a garment that is moth-eaten. Despite his pain, Job did not turn away from God. He remained desperate for answers, but refused to falsely admit to wrongdoing. He longed for a mediator, someone who could stand between him and God and bring understanding to his suffering. As Job continued his lament, he turned his attention to the frailty of human life and the seemingly relentless suffering that came with it. He spoke with deep sorrow, reflecting on the shortness and difficulty of life on earth. "Man born of woman is of few days and full of trouble," he mourned. Life, he observed, was like a fleeting shadow, passing quickly and without permanence. Job longed for God to look upon him with mercy instead of judgment. He questioned why God would fix his gaze upon such a fragile creature, scrutinizing every action as if mankind could ever stand justified in his sight. Do you fix your eyes on them? Will you bring them before you for judgment? Job pleaded for relief, asking why humanity was given such hardship when their existence was so brief. Job compared human life to a tree. A tree, when cut down, could still have hope. New shoots could sprout from its roots, and with water it could grow again. But a human, once dead, seemed to have no such hope. If a man dies, shall he live again? He asked, pondering the mysteries of life and death. He wondered whether God would remember him after he had passed, whether there could be hope for renewal beyond the grave. In his anguish, Job expressed a deep longing for a place of refuge. He wished that God would hide him in the grave until his wrath had passed, setting a time to remember him and restore him. "You would call, and I would answer you," he said with yearning. Job still clung to the idea that if God truly desired, he could one day bring justice and redemption even beyond death. Yet, as he considered his suffering, Job felt the weight of despair again. He lamented that mankind was held accountable for every fault, watched by God as though under constant judgment. "For now you number my steps. Do you not watch over my sin?" He feared that his transgressions, however small, had been sealed against him, and that God was allowing his suffering to consume him without end. The image of water-eroding stone came to Job's mind. Just as water wears away rock over time, he felt that his hope was gradually being washed away by his suffering. "You overpower him forever, and he is gone. You change his countenance and send him away." He mourned that in the end a person fades from memory, their existence forgotten, their suffering unnoticed by those who come after. After a long period of suffering, Job finally received an answer from God. The Lord spoke to him out of a whirlwind, challenging Job's understanding of divine wisdom and power. God did not provide a direct explanation for Job's suffering, but instead reminded him of his supreme authority over creation. Job, realizing his limited knowledge, humbly admitted that he had spoken without true understanding. He repented for questioning God's plans and submitted fully to his will. God then turned to Job's friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, and rebuked them for misrepresenting him. They had falsely accused Job of sin, assuming that suffering must be a direct result of wrongdoing. God commanded them to offer sacrifices and instructed Job to pray for them so that they would be forgiven. Job, despite his suffering, interceded for his friends, demonstrating his righteousness and compassion. After Job's prayer, God restored his fortunes. He blessed Job with twice as much as he had before. His livestock, wealth, and reputation were all renewed. His family and friends returned to comfort him, and they brought him gifts as a sign of respect and love. God also gave Job 10 more children, 7 sons, and 3 daughters. His daughters were known for their beauty, and unlike many in that time, they received an inheritance alongside their brothers. This detail highlighted God's abundant grace and justice. Job lived for 140 more years, seeing his children and grandchildren grow. He died at a ripe old age, full of years and blessings. His story became a testament to God's faithfulness, proving that even in suffering, God's wisdom prevails. The story of Job teaches that trials do not always come as a punishment for sin. Sometimes, suffering serves a greater purpose, testing faith, refining character, or revealing God's sovereignty. Through his endurance, Job demonstrated unwavering faith. And in the end, God restored his life beyond what he had lost. And so, after all his trials, Job's faith remained unbroken. God, in his justice and mercy, restored Job's fortunes, blessing him with twice as much as before. He was given new sons and daughters, his wealth was multiplied, and his health restored. But more than riches, Job gained something far greater, a deeper understanding of God's sovereignty and faithfulness. Job's story is not just one of suffering, it's one of endurance, faith, and divine restoration. It reminds us that even in our darkest moments, God is still in control, working out his perfect plan. No matter what trials you face, trust that your story isn't over yet. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more powerful biblical stories, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Share this with someone who needs encouragement today. God bless you.